Hello, my name is Dr. Kara Pickens, and today I am sharing with you a lesson about how having a positive perspective enables you to find happiness despite how others might view your circumstances. I will be teaching this lesson through the poem Identity by Julio Noboa Polanco. Have you ever noticed that really young children love dandelions? And why wouldn't they? Dandelions are often the first little dots of color that peep out of the ground in the spring. I have several times seen little children, mainly my own, discover dandelions and quickly run to pick a handful to give to one of the older people, often me, in their lives. If they're lucky, the older adult responds by saying thank you and expressing gratitude. If they're not so lucky, might get told quickly that dandelions are a weed. And despite this child's best intentions, the dandelion truly is just a weed. They grow everywhere. People spray pesticides to kill them in their yard. Other people pull them out of gardens, annoyed that they're growing up amongst the real flowers. Once we get past being a pretty little kid, we quickly realize that a bouquet of dandelions is not exactly a gift. We figure out pretty quickly as we grow up what is supposed to be beautiful and what is not, just like dandelions. Unfortunately, this often informs our perspective. A perspective is how we view things in the world, or how we even view ourselves. You can have a positive perspective and think about all the good things, or you can have a negative perspective and just focus on the bad. And our perspective often shapes our ability to find happiness. If we have a negative perspective about everything, it's really easy to feel anger or sadness. And if we have a positive perspective, it helps us to be hopeful about our circumstances and find happiness. That doesn't mean we shouldn't be angry when something's not right or that we can't feel sad when things are upsetting. But having a positive perspective doesn't just mean ignoring the things in the world that are bad. It means being hopeful that things can get better. Having a positive perspective also means believing in the potential for good or beauty, even when it seems challenging to do that. In our poem today, the speaker decides to view something that most people see as negative in a positive way. I really love how the speaker decides to have a positive perspective and find happiness in her circumstances this way. Identity by Julio Noboa Polanco. Let them be as flowers, always watered, fed, guarded, admired, but harnessed to a pot of dirt. I'd rather be a tall, ugly weed, clinging on cliffs like an eagle, wind wavering above high, jagged rocks. To have broken through the surface of stone, to live, to feel exposed to the badness of the vast, eternal sky, to be swayed by the breezes of an ancient sea, carrying my soul, my seed, beyond the mountains of time or into the abyss of the bizarre. I'd rather be unseen, and if then shunned by everyone, than to be a pleasant-smelling flower, growing in clusters in the fertile valley where they're praised, handled, and plucked by greedy human hands. I'd rather smell of musty, green stench than of sweet, fragrant lilac. If I could stand alone, strong and free, I'd rather be a tall, ugly weed. The speaker in this poem uses an image of a weed as a way of understanding herself and decides to have a positive perspective about it. Instead of focusing on the parts of herself that are difficult or thorny, she decides to see herself with a positive perspective by understanding those parts of herself as signs of strength. By developing a positive perspective, we can find greater happiness in our current situations. And I want to give an example from my own life that's been really helpful in having a positive perspective. When I was really little, I was treated very cruelly by someone who was very close to me, and it was very hurtful, and I still think today about how that impacted me. It could be really easy for me to look back and only think about the bad in that situation and to just have a bad perspective, a negative perspective on the situation. But as I've gotten older, I've realized how many people I've been able to help because I had those experiences. The situation I had made me more sensitive to understanding other people's situations. It's also helped me to find happiness by focusing on the ways this has helped me, rather than just focusing on the ways that it was negative for me. And I've tried to keep a positive perspective as I've looked back on these experiences, and it's been really helpful for me. I don't ignore the bad that happened or just pretend like it didn't happen, but I try to have a positive perspective and focus on the good that's come out of it. As we work on our activity today, I want you to think about how you're going to develop a positive perspective about things. What good can you find in situations that are not always viewed as beautiful? Next, I'm going to go through your graphic organizer and worksheet and explain to you what you're going to be doing with your activity. For your activity today, you're going to be doing something similar to the speaker in the poem that we read. You're going to be taking an object and you're going to be thinking about an object that we normally have a negative perspective on. And so you're going to be listing the attributes that we might view about that object in a negative way. But then you're going to take that same object and you're going to think about how you could have a positive perspective about that object. And so you're going to practice having a positive perspective on something that isn't always viewed positively, just like the weed in our poem today. So the first thing I want you to do is to think about an object that isn't normally viewed in a positive way. And I've given you some examples on the worksheet that you can work with. I thought of a desert. I thought of home. And for some people, home is a really positive place, but for some people, it's not. So some of us just have mixed feelings. And spiders, the feeling of loneliness, mountains, family, rain, boredom, or school. So I tried to choose objects that we sometimes have negative views of. Not always, but sometimes. And I want you to choose one of those. Or you can create your own image that you want to work with, so you can be creative if you want. The second thing you're going to do is to think about how you could view that object or feeling in a negative way, and then think about how you could view it in a positive way. So we're going to think about viewing the same object with different perspectives. And you could do this in a couple different ways, and it might depend on your grade level and how you think through these, and you can use all of these, or you could just use some of these. So one of the things that you can do is come up with an image that shows this in a negative way and then shows it in a positive way. You could either draw that image, or you could find that image online, or you could cut a picture out of a magazine. And then another option that you could do is you could make a list of the positive things about the object and the negative things about the object. Or you could do both the image and the list. So in my modeled example, I'm doing both the image and the list so you can see what that looks like. Okay, so I'm actually not going to be that creative, and I'm going to use the example from the poem, The Weeds. And that way we're all working with something that we're kind of familiar with already. So the first, I did it with a negative perspective, and that was pretty easy, especially right now because I'm just starting to garden and weed my garden, and so it's easy to think negatively about the weeds. So I found an image that was a pretty negative view of weeds. That is one ugly, tall, awful weed. And then I wrote descriptions of it, of how I would view that weed from a negative perspective. So it's thorny, it's ugly, it's bothersome, it's painful. I just stepped on one the other day. They're needy, they're constantly coming up. Okay, and then I thought about, okay, so how can I look at that with a positive perspective? So I found an image that I thought showed a more positive view of weeds. I mean, it had this really beautiful thistle. And then I wrote some descriptors of how I could view that in a positive way. So it's colorful, it's vibrant, it's strong, very strong, free, it's tall. So I was thinking of how I could view that with a more positive perspective. And you're going to do the same thing. So you have a chart that you can kind of work with. You can put images in it. You can put descriptions in it. You can be creative in how you view that object. You can use one of the objects from my list, or you can use an image of your own that you've created. So the idea with this is that we have practice trying to think of the positives and the way that we can have a positive perspective, even about things that are difficult to have a positive perspective with. And the more that we practice that, we can start doing that in our own life and in our own circumstances as well. So that's our lesson today. Thank you so much.